So we've already talked about this word compromise lots of times. Compromises during the Constitution over slavery, Missouri Compromise over admitting Missouri as a slave state and admitting Maine now as a free state. And we are going to be up to the year 1850, and we are going to have another compromise. And this compromise, again, is to hopefully help solve problems between the slave states and the free states. So we're kind of back to this question about letting new states into the United States, because as we know, we start with 13, but we get bigger, so more states are added as the years go on. And also this idea of representation. And it kind of all starts around California and the Mexican War. The Mexican War is something that we're not going to be able to get into this year, but go to war with Mexico in 1846. This war makes a lot of our future Civil War generals famous, notably Robert E. Lee. And what happens is after the Mexican War, we're granted lands, a secession. So, and what do we do with these lands? And then Texas becomes part of the United States, but Texas is a slave state. Now you also have California, okay? Now something important happens in California. And in California in 1848 at Sutter's Mill, you have the discovery of gold, which starts the California gold rush in 1849. And people flock to California. People from across the United States, people across the ocean from the Pacific, from China, all are coming to find gold into California. And so California's population expands overnight, and they want to be admitted as a state with all the benefits of statehood. But the problem is, are they going to be admitted as a slave state? Or are they going to be admitted as a free state? And this starts the same old argument going on in Congress as to what's going to happen, and the same old argument over representation, and the same old argument about the balance of power between slave and free states. And these arguments started really back with the Constitution. I think it was Madison who said the real argument over representation with the Constitution was not between big states and small states, but was really with slave states and free states. And that, by the time 1850 comes around, that really is true. There's this power struggle going back and forth between North and South, and who will have more control in the government, slave states or free states. And so Henry Clay, a senator from Kentucky, comes up with the compromise, and it has basically 8 points to it to try to make everybody happy. Okay, Texas is going to be a slave state. Texas is an awfully big slave state. Texas wants to spread out across what's now New Mexico. So he says, okay, well, Texas will stay slave. The land over towards what's now New Mexico will remain a territory. We'll let the people there decide what they want to do. And we'll admit California as a free state. And a lot of people in California wanted to be admitted as a free state, not necessarily because they didn't like slavery, but because they didn't want all the slave owners coming and bringing their slaves and using their slaves to dig for gold. They wanted to be able to have access to that gold and to have everything be fair. So, and of course, this angered the slaveholders. So the southern states were angry that California was admitted as a free state. The northern states were angry that Texas was being admitted as a slave state. It didn't really make anybody happy, okay? And one of the big things with the Compromise of 1850 that really infuriated especially abolitionists is they made a stronger fugitive slave law. A fugitive is somebody who runs from the law. And so they considered escaped slaves to be fugitives, people running from the law. I mean, but you're escaping slavery, but since slavery was a law, if you were running away, you were breaking the law. And if you're helping a runaway, you were breaking the law. Now, there was a fugitive slave law kind of in the Constitution. It wasn't called that, and it wasn't really enforced, and it wasn't terribly a powerful law, for lack of a better word. But the one in 1850 was much more powerful and had basically required people to return escaped slaves, even if they made it up north, to return them back south. And it also paid a bounty, which is the amount of money, It's a bounty hunter. You collect the criminal, you bring them back, you get money. A bounty that if you returned a slave to slavery, you would get more, or if you found that the slave was indeed a slave and returned him to slavery, you would get more money in court than if you determined that the person was free. I'm not quite sure that I've worded that correctly, but basically they made it so people would make more money returning slaves to slavery than they would if those people were actually free. And what that kind of did is it made it so people who weren't even slaves or escaped slaves could be captured and brought back to slavery, because the judges would get more money if they decided that they were a slave and returned them to the South to slave owners. So as you can imagine, this infuriated all sorts of people. It made people mad about slave states and free states. It made people mad who were for slavery and against slavery. And even though they called it a compromise, the compromise of 1850 really made nobody happy.